An immigrant janitor returned a dropped wallet, never knowing the owner would fund his dream bakery. The phrase echoed in Alejandro Mendez's mind like a prophecy he couldn't yet understand as he swept the polished floors of Westfield Financial Tower at 2 a.m., the only sound the rhythmic scratch of his broom against marble. The night shift suited him, quiet, predictable. In the emptiness of these corporate hallways, he didn't have to struggle with his still broken English or endure the sideways glances that said, without words, that he didn't belong. After 3 years in America, Alejandro had learned to make himself invisible, a skill that served him well as he moved through the sleeping building, erasing evidence of the day's human presence. Tonight, his hands moved mechanically through familiar motions, while his mind wandered to the small notebook hidden in his jacket pocket. It contained his recipes, treasures carried across borders, oceans, and years. His grandmother's conscious, his mother's tres leches, his own experiments with cinnamon and chocolate, perfected in the cramped kitchen of the apartment he shared with 2 other men. Baking was the language Alejandro spoke fluently, though he had no audience here. The irony wasn't lost on him. He cleaned the offices of people who probably spent more on lunch than he earned in a day, while dreams of his own bakery collected dust like the corners he meticulously swept. He'd done the math countless times. The startup costs, equipment, rent, permits, might as well have been millions for how far beyond his reach they remain. He pushed his cart toward the executive suites, the section reserved for last because it required extra attention. The brass plates on the doors gleamed under his cloth. Davidson, Harper, Miller, Wexler. Names that represented an America that existed in a parallel universe to his own. It was in the hallway outside Wexler that Alejandro's broom dislodged something from beneath a sleek leather chair. A wallet, expensive black leather worn soft at the edges. It lay splayed open, revealing credit cards, an ID, and what looked like several $100 bills. Alejandro's heart hammered against his ribs. 6 months of rent, right there. Maybe more. His hands trembled as he knelt to pick it up, the weight of possibility suddenly tangible. The face on the driver's license stared back at him. Wexler, Daniel J. The same Wexler whose name adorned the door 10 feet away. The same Wexler who, according to building gossip, had recently become the youngest partner in the firm's history. Alejandro closed his eyes, his grandmother's voice suddenly clear in his memory. Your name is all you have. Your name is all you have. With a deep breath, he tucked the wallet into his pocket, not the one with his recipes, but the other one, and continued his work. He would turn it into security at the end of his shift. The right thing, even when no one was watching. He couldn't have known that this small act of integrity would collide with another man's life in ways neither could imagine. Daniel Wexler's morning began with panic. Canceled? What do you mean canceled? He pressed his phone harder against his ear, as if that might change the words coming through it. The cab's interior felt suddenly airless as Manhattan traffic inched forward. I'm sorry, Mr. Wexler. His assistant's voice remained professionally calm. Your cards have been reported stolen. The fraud department froze everything. They're sending replacements, but it will take 24 to 48 hours. Daniel closed his eyes, the implications cascading through his mind. No cards meant no access to the financial presentation he needed to deliver in. He checked his watch. 90 minutes. No ability to grab emergency coffee for the team. No backup plan. My wallet, he muttered. I must have left it at the office last night. Security called. Someone turned it in. All contents intact. They're holding it for you. A small mercy. Who found it? One of the night cleaning staff. I have the name somewhere. Mendez. Maintenance said he's worked the building for a few years. Very reliable. Daniel hardly registered the rest of the conversation. 34 years old, the youngest partner at Wexler Financial Strategies. No relation to the founding Wexler, a coincidence he'd leveraged more than once. And he'd nearly derailed a multi-million-dollar client meeting because he couldn't keep track of his wallet. By the time he reached the tower's security desk, Daniel's initial relief had curdled into irritation. At himself, at the situation, at the entire morning. He signed for the wallet, verified its contents, cash untouched, cards all present, and headed toward the elevator. Mr. Wexler? The security guard called after him. The janitor who found it, Mendez. He's usually here around 2 p.m. before his shift. Thought you might want to know. Daniel nodded absently, already mentally rehearsing his presentation. Thank you could wait. Everything could wait until after he closed this deal. What couldn't wait, it turned out, was the memory of his father's voice, surfacing unbidden as the elevator climbed. The measure of a man is how he treats those who can do nothing for him. His father, who'd built a modest accounting practice through handshakes and remembered birthdays, who died without wealth but with a church full of mourners, people whose tax returns he'd prepared, whose children's college funds he'd helped plan, whose small businesses he'd guided through lean years. The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor, and Daniel stepped into the cool, controlled environment of Wexler Financial Strategies. His domain, his name on the door, even if it wasn't his family's firm. He would remember to thank the janitor. Eventually, Alejandro didn't expect recognition for returning the wallet. In his experience, doing the right thing rarely came with rewards. Just the quiet satisfaction of being able to look at yourself in the mirror the next morning. So when Marcus, the afternoon security guard, mentioned that Mr. Wexler had asked about him, Alejandro felt a flutter of anxiety rather than pride. Had something been missing? Was there a problem? Relax, man, Marcus said, noting his expression. Your honesty made you a friend in a high place. That's all. Alejandro nodded, unconvinced. In his 3 years in America, he'd learned that attention from those in power rarely benefited people like him. He pushed his cleaning cart into the service elevator, mentally preparing for another night of empty hallways and forgotten trash cans. Tonight's shift would be harder than usual. He'd been up since dawn, helping his neighbor Eva with her English citizenship application forms. His own application was still years away, his status a patchwork of temporary permissions and constant paperwork. The service elevator opened directly into the maintenance area, where Alejandro stored his personal belongings in a small locker. As he changed into his uniform, gray pants and a blue shirt with building services embroidered on the pocket, he felt the familiar weight of his recipe notebook. A ritual, every shift he brought it with him, a talisman, a reminder of the dream he carried. He was organizing his cleaning supplies when he heard the door open. Turning, he found himself face to face with a tall man in an expensive suit, dark hair precisely cut, tie the color of money. Mr. Mendez, the man extended his hand. Daniel Wexler, I believe you found my wallet last night. Alejandro wiped his palm on his pants before accepting the handshake, acutely aware of the contrast between them. One man dressed for success, the other for invisibility. Yes, sir. On floor 32. His English came out stiff, formal, the words practiced but not natural. I wanted to thank you personally. Wexler reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. There was a considerable amount of cash in that wallet, along with irreplaceable items. Your honesty means a great deal. Alejandro stared at the envelope, making no move to take it. No need for payment, sir. Just doing my job. It's not... Wexler seemed momentarily thrown by the refusal. Consider it a token of appreciation, not payment. Thank you, but no. Alejandro's grandmother again. Pride costs nothing and is worth everything. An awkward silence stretched between them. Two men from different worlds, standing in a room that belonged to neither. Wexler finally returned the envelope to his pocket. Well, thank you again, Mr. Mendez. If there's ever anything I can do for you, my office is on 32. Alejandro nodded, already turning back to his cart. The encounter would be a story to tell Eva, nothing more. He couldn't have known that Daniel Wexler, walking away, was experiencing something unfamiliar. Respect tinged with shame. Shame at the assumption that money would be the appropriate response. Shame at realizing he knew nothing about the man who cleaned his office every night. Shame at recognizing in that moment of refusal his father's integrity in a stranger's eyes. Daniel found himself thinking about the janitor at odd moments over the next few weeks. During client meetings, riding in elevators, staring at spreadsheets of wealth management projections, the image of Alejandro Mendez refusing the envelope would surface unexpectedly. It wasn't the refusal itself that lingered, but what Daniel had glimpsed in that moment. Dignity that had nothing to do with status or possessions. The kind of dignity his father had embodied, which Daniel himself had gradually exchanged for the trappings of success. He began staying late at the office. At first, he told himself it was to prepare for the Westerton account, a potential client that could cement his position at the firm. But he knew somewhere beneath his conscious thoughts that he was waiting for the night shift to begin, waiting to see Alejandro again. Their second meeting happened on a Thursday evening, as Daniel was leaving a conference room after a marathon strategy session. Alejandro was emptying trash bins, methodically working his way down the hall. Mr. Mendez. Daniel's voice sounded overly formal, even to his own ears. Alejandro looked up, surprise flickering across his face before his expression returned to its careful neutrality. Good evening, Mr. Wexler. Working late again. Daniel said, immediately regretting the obvious statement. Always. Alejandro offered a small smile. Bills don't pay themselves. No, they certainly don't. Daniel shifted his weight, aware of the absurdity of small talk with the man who cleaned his office. Have you always been a janitor? The moment the question left his mouth, Daniel wanted to take it back. It sounded condescending, as if being a janitor was something that required explanation. But Alejandro didn't seem offended. In America, yes. 3 years now. He hesitated, then added, in Guatemala, I was a baker. My family had a small panaderia, bakery for 3 generations. A baker? Daniel hadn't expected this glimpse into another life. Juanam, why did you leave? Gas gangs. Extortion. Alejandro's eyes darkened. They wanted money we didn't have. Made threats against my sister's children. His hands tightened on the trash bin. So I came here. Send money home when I can. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. The enormity of leaving behind a family business, a country, an identity, distilled into a few short sentences. I'm sorry, Daniel said, the words inadequate against the weight of Alejandro's story. Alejandro shrugged. Many people have worse stories. He glanced at his watch. I should continue working. Of course. Daniel stepped aside, then added impulsively, do you still bake? Something changed in Alejandro's expression. A softening, a light. When I can. Small apartment, shared kitchen. Not the same, but you miss it. Every day. The words carried a depth of longing that resonated in the empty hallway. Someday, perhaps. The American dream, no? A smile that didn't reach his eyes. Daniel nodded and walked away, but the conversation followed him home, settling into his thoughts like a pebble in a shoe, small but impossible to ignore. That night, he dreamed of his father's modest office, the familiar smell of coffee and paper, the sound of his laughter as he explained to a young Daniel that money was just a tool, not a measure of a life well lived. He woke with his father's voice still echoing. Use what you have to help others build what they need. Weeks passed and a peculiar rhythm developed. Daniel began staying late 2 or 3 nights a week, timing his departure to coincide with Alejandro's arrival. Their conversations were brief at first. Comments about the weather, the building, the city, but gradually expanded. Daniel learned that Alejandro had been the head baker at his family's shop, known for traditional Guatemalan sweetbreads and European-inspired pastries. He learned about Alejandro's sister Maria and her 3 children, who still lived in Guatemala City, supported in part by Alejandro's remittances. He learned that Alejandro lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens with 2 other immigrants, that he worked 60 hours a week between the tower and a weekend job at a car wash, that he sent 2/3 of his earnings home. What he didn't share with Alejandro was how these conversations had begun to shift something fundamental in his own perspective, how the metrics by which he measured success had started to feel hollow. On a rainy Tuesday in October, Daniel found himself alone in the office kitchen after everyone else had gone home. On impulse, he opened his laptop and searched for small business bakery startup costs, NYC. The numbers that appeared made him wince. Even in the outer boroughs, the initial investment required was substantial. Equipment, licenses, rent deposits, inventory, staffing. The bare minimum to open a viable bakery was well into 6 figures. For Daniel, such an amount represented a few good investment years, perhaps a delayed purchase of a vacation property. For Alejandro, it represented an impossible mountain. He was still staring at the screen when he heard the service elevator's distinctive chime. Mr. Wexler? Alejandro stood in the doorway, surprise evident. You're here late. Just finishing some research. Daniel closed the laptop, suddenly self-conscious. And please, call me Daniel. After all these conversations, Mr. Wexler seems overly formal. Alejandro nodded, though Daniel noticed he didn't offer a reciprocal invitation to use his first name, another small reminder of the boundaries between their worlds. I brought something, Alejandro said, reaching into his bag. He produced a small container. Conchas. I baked them yesterday. Traditional Mexican sweetbread, but with my own. Hayami. How do you say twist? Daniel accepted the container, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. Inside were 3 shell-shaped pastries, their tops scored in patterns that resembled seashells, dusted with colored sugar. That's incredibly kind. Thank you. He carefully took one out. May I? Please. Best fresh, but still good. Daniel bit into the concha and immediately understood. The bread was soft, lightly sweet, with hints of vanilla and something else he couldn't identify. Cinnamon, perhaps, but warmer, more complex. "This is amazing," he said, meaning it. "Truly exceptional." Alejandro's face transformed with pride, years seeming to fall away. "My grandmother's recipe with cardamom added. Not traditional, but I think it improves." "I'd say it definitely does." Daniel finished the pastry, aware that he was witnessing something precious. Alejandro not as a janitor, but as a craftsman, an artist with flour and sugar. "You should be selling these, not cleaning floors." As soon as the words left his mouth, Daniel regretted them. They sounded patronizing, dismissive of Alejandro's current work. But Alejandro just smiled, a true smile that reached his eyes. "Someday, perhaps." He gestured toward the hallway. "I should start my rounds." Daniel watched him go, the taste of the concha lingering. An idea had begun to take shape, nebulous at first, then gaining clarity and purpose with each passing minute. He reopened his laptop and began to research in earnest. The next morning, Daniel called his father's old law partner, Michael Greenstein. Now semi-retired but still the most knowledgeable person Daniel knew about small business structures. "A bakery?" Michael's voice crackled with amusement over the phone. "Daniel Wexler, wealth management wonderkin, wants to open a bakery?" "Not for myself," Daniel clarified, pacing his office. "I'm exploring options for a friend, someone with extraordinary talent but limited resources." "Ah." Michael's tone shifted, became thoughtful. "An investment, then, in a manner of speaking. And this friend, do they have legal status to operate a business?" Daniel stopped pacing. "I'm not certain." "That's your first question, then. Everything else follows from there." The conversation continued, Michael outlining various business structures, financing options, potential pitfalls. By the end, Daniel had pages of notes and a growing appreciation for the complexity of what he was considering. That evening, he waited for Alejandro near the service elevator, his heart beating faster than it did before major client presentations. "May I ask you a personal question?" Daniel said after their usual greetings. Alejandro hesitated, then nodded once. "Your status here, in the U.S., are you able to legally own a business?" The question hung between them, fraught with implications. Alejandro's expression closed, became guarded. "I have TPS, temporary protected status. Can work legally, pay taxes." His voice was careful, measured. "Why do you ask this?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about being a baker, about your family's business in Guatemala. And I've tasted your baking." He smiled, trying to lighten the sudden tension. "The thing is, I'm in a position to help someone start a business." "The right someone with the right business?" Alejandro stared at him, confusion evident. "I don't understand." "I'm saying I would like to fund your bakery. As an investment." The words tumbled out now, faster than Daniel intended. "You have the talent, the experience, the vision. I have capital that I'd like to put towards something meaningful. Something that creates rather than just accumulates." Silence stretched between them. Alejandro's face had gone completely still, unreadable. "This is not charity," Daniel added quickly. "It would be structured as a proper business arrangement. You would have majority ownership, creative control. I would be a silent partner." More silence. "Please say something," Daniel finally said. Alejandro looked down at his hands. Strong hands, calloused from work, capable of both cleaning floors and creating delicate pastries. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with an emotion Daniel couldn't quite name. "Why would you do this?" The question was soft, genuine. "You don't know me," Daniel considered his answer carefully. "Because I've spent my career helping wealthy people become wealthier. Because my father would have been disappointed in how little I've used my position to make a real difference. Because your conchas are the best thing I've tasted in years." He paused. "Because when you refused my money that first day, I realized I wanted to be more like you than you could ever want to be like me." Alejandro's exhale was audible in the quiet hallway. "This is too much to consider now. While I'm working, I need time." "Of course." Daniel reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "My personal number's on the back. Call me when you're ready to talk. No pressure, no timeline." Alejandro accepted the card, holding it carefully as if it might dissolve between his fingers. "Thank you," he said finally, "for thinking I could do this." "I don't think it," Daniel replied. "I know it." He walked away, leaving Alejandro standing by the service elevator, a business card in one hand and possibility expanding before him like dawn breaking over a new horizon. Seeing her 3 days passed with no call, Daniel told himself he wasn't checking his phone obsessively, that he wasn't disappointed each time it rang and Alejandro's name didn't appear on the screen. He told himself that whatever decision Alejandro made would be the right one. On the fourth day, as evening settled over Manhattan, his phone finally lit up with an unknown number. "This is Daniel Wexler." "Mr. Wexler, it's Alejandro Mendez." The formal address had returned, setting a tone. "I have considered your proposal." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "And I would like to discuss it further, but not as janitor and building tenant, as equals." "Of course. There is a cafe near where I live. Doña Elena's on Roosevelt Avenue. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. if you are available." "I'll be there," Daniel said, already rearranging his mental schedule. "Client meetings be damned. Bring your lawyer paperwork," Alejandro added. "I will have someone with me who understands these things." The call ended, leaving Daniel staring at his phone, equal parts nervous and exhilarated. This was really happening. Torrejournaron Doña Elena's cafe sat wedged between a cell phone repair shop and a Western Union in a vibrant stretch of Jackson Heights, Queens. Daniel, arriving 15 minutes early, felt conspicuously out of place in his tailored suit among the Saturday morning crowd of families and workers grabbing coffee and pan dolce. He chose a table near the window, ordered coffee in his rusty college Spanish, and waited, watching the neighborhood life unfold around him. So different from the sterile luxury of his Upper East Side apartment building. At exactly 10 a.m., Alejandro entered, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Daniel stood to greet them. "Mr. Wexler," Alejandro said, "this is Eva Morales. She helps many in our community with business matters." Eva's handshake was firm, her assessment of Daniel unabashedly direct. "So you are the businessman who wants to give Alejandro a bakery." "I want to invest in his bakery," Daniel corrected gently. "There's a difference." Eva nodded, seemingly satisfied with the distinction. "Show me your papers then." For the next hour, they huddled over documents Michael had prepared. Articles of incorporation, investment terms, profit-sharing structures. Eva asked pointed, intelligent questions that revealed her deep knowledge of small business operations. Alejandro mostly listened, occasionally asking for clarification in rapid Spanish that Eva would translate into precise English questions. The core of Daniel's proposal was simple. He would provide startup capital of $300,000 in exchange for 25% ownership. Alejandro would have complete creative and operational control. Profits would be reinvested for the first 3 years, after which Alejandro could begin buying out Daniel's share if he wished. "And if the business fails?" Eva asked bluntly. "Then I lose my investment." Daniel replied, "That's the nature of business risk." "And Alejandro loses his dream." Again, her eyes challenged him. "What then?" Daniel hadn't expected this question. "Then, we reassess. Together. I'm not interested in recovering my investment at the cost of Alejandro's future." Eva translated this for Alejandro, whose eyes remained fixed on Daniel's face, searching for something beyond the words. Why this generosity to a stranger? Eva asked, but Daniel understood the question was really from Alejandro. Daniel considered deflecting with talk of diversified investments or community development, the language of business that created safe distance. Instead, he found himself speaking truth. "My father built his business on relationships and integrity. When he died, hundreds of people came to his funeral. Not because he was wealthy or powerful, but because he had helped them build secure futures." He looked directly at Alejandro. "When you returned my wallet with everything intact, then refused a reward, it reminded me of him. Of what matters? I have more money than I need, but not enough purpose." Eva translated, her voice softening as she spoke. Alejandro's expression changed, the wariness giving way to something like recognition, as if seeing Daniel clearly for the first time. After a long moment, Alejandro extended his hand across the table. "Partners, then. If you are certain." Daniel took his hand, the handshake sealing more than a business arrangement. "I've never been more certain of anything." Eva smiled, the first real smile she'd offered. "Now we discuss the real details. Location, equipment, permits, staff." She pulled out a notebook. Alejandro has been planning this for years. As Alejandro opened the notebook, the same one Daniel had glimpsed before, filled with recipes and diagrams, Daniel saw the future taking shape between them. A small bakery with big windows, the scent of cardamom and vanilla. A line of customers discovering what Daniel already knew, that Alejandro Mendez was not just a janitor who had returned a wallet, but an artist about to reclaim his rightful place in the world. The next 6 months passed in a blur of activity. Daniel discovered that starting a bakery involved a labyrinth of permits, inspections, equipment specifications, and vendor relationships that rivaled the complexity of his financial deals. Alejandro revealed himself to be not just a talented baker, but a shrewd businessman with clear vision and attention to detail. They found a location in Sunnyside, Queens, a former flower shop with good foot traffic and the right zoning. Daniel handled the financial and legal aspects while Alejandro focused on equipment selection, recipe development, and staffing. Eva became their unofficial project manager, her community connections proving invaluable for navigating city bureaucracy. Throughout the process, their relationship evolved. The initial formality dissolved into genuine friendship as they worked side by side. Daniel rolling up his sleeves to help paint walls, Alejandro patiently teaching Daniel the difference between Mexican conchas and Guatemalan champuradas. They shared meals, stories, frustrations, and small victories. Daniel learned about the family Alejandro had left behind. Not just his sister and her children, but parents now too elderly to work the bakery, cousins who had scattered across Central America seeking safety. He learned about the journey north, the terror and hope mingled in equal measure. He learned about Alejandro's dream to eventually bring his family to join him, to rebuild what had been lost. In turn, Alejandro came to understand Daniel's world. The pressure of managing other people's wealth, the emptiness of success measured only in dollar signs, the complicated legacy of a father whose values Daniel had set aside in pursuit of status. He learned that Daniel's polished exterior hid a loneliness that matched his own, though born of different circumstances. As winter gave way to spring, the bakery took shape. They named it Pan de Vida, bread of life, a nod to both Alejandro's heritage and the new beginning it represented. The interior combined modern clean lines with warm woods and colorful tile work that reminded Alejandro of home. A glass case would display both traditional Central American pastries and European-inspired creations. Coffee would come from a women's cooperative in Guatemala that Eva had connections with. "We open in 3 weeks," Alejandro said one evening as they sat amid paint cans and drop cloths, sharing takeout from the Vietnamese place down the street. "It doesn't seem possible, yet here we are." Daniel gestured to the space around them. The gleaming equipment in the kitchen visible through the pass-through window, the hand-painted sign waiting to be hung. From concept to reality in half a year. From janitor to baker. Alejandro's smile held wonder and trepidation in equal measure. "My father would not believe it." "He will when you bring him here." Daniel had been working with an immigration attorney to explore options for Alejandro's family. A complicated process, but not impossible. Alejandro nodded, his expression turning serious. "I have never properly thanked you. For all of this, you don't need to. This isn't charity, remember? It's an investment, not just in the bakery." Alejandro's voice was quiet. "In me, in my family's future. That is a different kind of investment." Daniel felt the weight of those words, understanding the trust they represented. "The returns are already coming in," he said simply. They sat in comfortable silence as evening settled over Queens. Two men from different worlds who had built something neither could have created alone. Opening day dawned clear and warm, perfect May weather that seemed designed for new beginnings. Daniel arrived at Pan de Vida at 4 a.m. to find Alejandro already there, kneading dough with focused intensity, the kitchen filled with the aromas of yeast, sugar, and possibility. You're early," Alejandro said without looking up, his hands moving with practiced precision. Couldn't sleep. Daniel hung his jacket on the hook by the door. "No suit today, just jeans and a button-down shirt. Thought I might be useful." Alejandro smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "You can check the front. Eva is arranging flowers." The next hours passed in orchestrated chaos as they prepared for the 7 a.m. opening. Daniel found himself assigned to coffee duty after a brief training session, while Eva directed the 2 young staff members they'd hired, both from the neighborhood, both eager to learn the bakery business. At 6:55, they gathered in the center of the shop. The cases were filled with conchas, champuradas, tres leches slices, Danish pastries, and Alejandro's signature cardamom cinnamon rolls. The coffee machines hummed ready. The register was primed. "Before we open," Alejandro said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes, "I want to thank each of you. This place exists because of your belief." He looked at Daniel. "Your investment," at Eva. "Your wisdom," at the 2 young staff members. "Your energy." He reached into his pocket and produced a small object, a well-worn silver medallion on a chain. "This was my grandfather's. He wore it every day in our family bakery. It is St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, patron saint of immigrants." He hung it carefully beside the register. "For luck and to remember where we come from." The simple ceremony complete, Alejandro straightened his baker's coat, crisp white, with pan de vida, and his name embroidered in blue, and nodded to Daniel. "Now we begin." Daniel moved to the door and turned the sign from closed to open, unlocking the door to whatever the day would bring. The first customers trickled in slowly, curious neighbors drawn by the new storefront, early morning workers seeking coffee. By 8 a.m., the trickle had become a steady stream. By 9, there was a line. Word had spread through Eva's network, through the local Spanish-language Facebook groups, through the invisible web of community connections that define neighborhoods like Sunnyside. People came not just for breakfast, but to welcome and support a new immigrant-owned business. Daniel found himself working alongside Alejandro in seamless coordination, switching between coffee preparation and cashier duties, learning on the fly, making mistakes, and recovering. The joy in the work surprised him. Not the abstract satisfaction of closing a deal, but the immediate reward of seeing customers' faces light up at first bites, hearing their exclamations, watching the cases gradually empty as the morning progressed. By noon, they had sold out of almost everything. Alejandro emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting his dark hair, exhaustion and elation competing in his expression. "We need to make more," he said, the statement both problem and triumph. "Is that possible?" Daniel asked, already calculating how many more hours they could stay open, how much additional revenue it might mean. Alejandro's smile was answer enough. For this, anything is possible. He disappeared back into the kitchen while Daniel and Eva rearranged the cases, consolidated the remaining items, and prepared for an afternoon rush. It was during this lull that the door opened, admitting a distinguished older couple. The woman petite and elegant in a simple dress, the man tall with Alejandro's same warm eyes. Eva gasped softly. "Dios mío." Daniel turned, confused by her reaction, until understanding dawned. The couple looking around the bakery with wondering eyes were unmistakably Alejandro's parents. "How?" he began. But Eva was already hurrying toward them, embracing the woman with tears streaming down her face. "A surprise," she explained over her shoulder to Daniel. "For Alejandro. His sister and I arranged it. Visitor visas, very difficult, but we managed." Daniel watched as Eva led the couple toward the kitchen, calling Alejandro's name. He hung back, giving them space for what he knew would be an emotional reunion. Through the pass-through window, he saw the moment Alejandro looked up from his work, saw his parents, the recognition and disbelief washing over his face. The bowl he was holding clattered to the counter as he rushed forward, enveloping both his mother and father in an embrace that contained 3 years of separation, of sacrifice, of dreams deferred and now, remarkably, fulfilled. Daniel felt his own eyes grow damp. This moment of family reunited, of joy uncomplicated by balance sheets or investment returns, was the real dividend of the wallet returned, the true yield on capital invested not just in a business, but in a human being's potential. He stepped outside to give them privacy, standing on the sidewalk in front of Pan de Vida, watching the neighborhood life flow around him. Mothers with strollers, teenagers with backpacks, workers on lunch breaks, all part of the vibrant tapestry that was so different from the monochromatic world he'd inhabited before meeting Alejandro. The door opened behind him, and Alejandro emerged, his eyes red-rimmed, but his face transformed with joy. "You knew about this," he said, not a question but a statement. Daniel shook his head. "Eva's doing, not mine. My parents are here. In my bakery." Alejandro's voice held wonder. "My father's already giving advice about the oven temperature." They both laughed, the sound carrying on the spring air. "Thank you," Alejandro said, the words simple but laden with meaning. "For everything." Daniel thought about the wallet he'd left behind 6 months ago. A careless moment that had led, through some combination of chance and choice, to this transformed reality. The immigrant janitor who had returned it had given him far more than he had lost. "I think we're even," he said, extending his hand. Alejandro clasped it, then pulled Daniel into an embrace. The distance between janitor and executive, between immigrant and citizen, between employee and employer, dissolved completely in the gesture. "Partners," Alejandro said as they separated, "in all things that matter." Together they walked back into Pan de Vida, where Alejandro's parents waited, where customers were beginning to return for the afternoon, where the scent of freshly baked bread promised nourishment for body and soul alike. Through the window, the spring sunlight illuminated the small bakery's interior, the gleaming cases, the warm wood tables, the silver medallion hanging beside the register, catching the light like a beacon. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of integrity can lead to the most profound transformations. And in that light, two men from worlds that should never have intersected stood side by side, their shadows merging into one. The past, with its hardships and losses not forgotten, but woven now into a future neither could have imagined alone.